The telegram arrived on a Tuesday morning in April of 1878, and Olivia Whitmore knew before she even opened it that her life in Boston was about to change forever. She stood in the parlor of her small boarding-house room, her fingers trembling slightly as she unfolded the yellow paper. The words swam before her eyes. "Your uncle Daniel Whitmore, deceased. Stop. Property in Montana Territory requires your immediate attention. Stop. Come to Copper Ridge. Stop." The message was signed by a lawyer named Harold Peterson. Olivia sank onto the narrow bed, her heart racing. Uncle Daniel. She had not seen him since she was a child of 7, when he had visited Boston with wild stories of the Western Territories, of mountains that touched the sky and rivers so clear you could count the stones at the bottom. Her mother, Daniel's sister, had died 3 years ago, leaving Olivia alone in the world at 22 years old. She worked as a seamstress, her fingers perpetually sore from pushing needles through thick fabric, her eyes strained from working by lamplight. The thought of an inheritance, of something that might change her circumstances, sent a flutter of hope through her chest. Within a week, she had settled her affairs, packed her 2 trunks with everything she owned, and boarded a train heading west. The journey was long and uncomfortable, the landscape gradually transforming from the familiar green hills of New England to the endless prairies, and eventually to the rugged mountains of Montana Territory. With each passing mile, Olivia felt herself moving further from everything she had known, venturing into a world she had only read about in dime novels. Copper Ridge was not what she expected. The town consisted of a single main street with a dozen weathered buildings, their false fronts fighting a losing battle against the elements. Mud from recent spring rains sucked at her boots as she stepped down from the stagecoach, her legs unsteady after days of travel. Mountains loomed in every direction, their peaks still white with snow despite the warming season. The air smelled different here, sharp with pine and something wild she could not name. The other passengers dispersed quickly, leaving Olivia standing beside her trunks, suddenly aware of how out of place she looked in her dark traveling dress and small hat. Men in dusty clothes and wide-brimmed hats walked past, some tipping their heads politely, others staring with open curiosity. She felt exposed, vulnerable in a way she had never experienced in Boston. Miss Whitmore, a thin man in a suit, approached, his face pinched and pale. "I'm Harold Peterson, the attorney who sent the telegram. Mr. Peterson." Olivia extended her gloved hand, relieved to have found her contact so quickly. "Thank you for writing to me. Your uncle's property is about 5 miles north of town," Peterson said, gesturing vaguely toward the mountains. "I've arranged for someone to take you out there tomorrow morning. For tonight, there's a boarding house run by Mrs. Chen that takes in respectable ladies. Tomorrow. But I'm here now. Couldn't we go today?" Peterson's expression grew uncomfortable. "Miss Whitmore, there are some complications regarding your inheritance that we need to discuss. Perhaps we should speak in my office." An hour later, Olivia sat in Peterson's cramped office above the general store, her hands clenched in her lap as he explained the situation. Uncle Daniel had owned a substantial piece of land, nearly 2,000 acres with water rights to a creek that ran through the property. It was valuable land, especially the parts suitable for grazing cattle. The problem was that another rancher, a man named Bradford Kane, claimed that Daniel had agreed to sell him a portion of the property before his death. Kane insisted he had a written agreement, though he had not yet produced it. "So what does this mean for me?" Olivia asked, her throat tight. "It means that until we settle Kane's claim, the property is in a complicated legal position. You own it, certainly, but Kane is being rather aggressive about his demands. He's a powerful man in these parts, Miss Whitmore. He owns the largest ranch in the territory, employs dozens of men. I would advise you to consider his offer to buy the entire property from you. It would be simpler. Simpler for whom? Olivia heard the edge in her own voice. Mr. Peterson, I came a very long way. I'd like to at least see what my uncle left me before I make any decisions about selling it. Peterson sighed but nodded. Very well. I'll have someone here at dawn to take you out there. That someone turned out to be a grizzled man named Tom who drove a wagon and said fewer than 10 words the entire journey. As they traveled north from Copper Ridge, Olivia stared out at the landscape, trying to imagine her uncle living here. The land rolled in gentle hills covered with grass that rippled like water in the wind. Clusters of pine trees dotted the slopes, and in the distance, the mountains rose like a fortress wall. It was beautiful in a stark, unforgiving way. They passed several ranches, identified by split-rail fences and distant buildings. Tom pointed with his whip at one particularly impressive spread. Kane's place, he said shortly. Olivia could see why Bradford Kane was considered powerful. His ranch buildings looked substantial and well-maintained, with numerous barns, corrals filled with horses, and a large house that suggested wealth. She felt a flutter of nervousness. What chance did she have against someone like that? But then they crested a hill, and Tom pulled the wagon to a stop. There, he said, pointing down into a valley below. Olivia's breath caught. A creek wound through the bottom of the valley, lined with cottonwood trees whose new leaves glowed almost yellow-green in the morning sun. The land rose gently on either side of the water, covered in thick grass. She could see a small cabin, a barn that leaned slightly, and several corrals. Cattle, maybe 24 head, grazed near the creek. It was not grand like Kane's ranch, but there was something about it that tugged at her heart. It's beautiful, she whispered. Tom made a sound that might have been agreement and urged the horses forward. As they approached the cabin, a man emerged from the barn. He was tall and lean, wearing dusty work clothes and a hat that shadowed his face. He stood with a stillness that reminded Olivia of a deer she had once seen in the Boston Public Garden, alert and ready to bolt. As the wagon drew closer, she could see he was young, perhaps close to her own age, with several days' worth of beard on his jaw and the kind of tan that came from working outdoors in all weather. Tom pulled the wagon to a stop. "This here's Miss Whitmore, Daniel's niece. Miss, this is Beckett Kane. He's been looking after the place since Daniel passed." Olivia felt as though she had been struck. "Kane? Are you related to Bradford Kane?" The man's expression, which had been carefully neutral, turned cold. "He's my father. But don't let that prejudice you against me, Miss Whitmore." "I'm not my father." She climbed down from the wagon without waiting for help, her mind racing. This changed everything. Was this some sort of scheme? "What are you doing here, Mr. Kane? Are you spying for your father?" "I'm feeding cattle and fixing fences, same as I've been doing for the past 2 years." His voice was quiet but firm. "Your uncle hired me when I needed work, and I stayed because he was a good man. When he died, someone needed to keep the place going, so I did." "Very convenient," Olivia said sharply. "Now you can report everything back to your father about my uncle's property." Something flashed in Beckett's eyes, hurt perhaps, but his expression remained controlled. "My father and I don't speak, Miss Whitmore. Haven't for 3 years. If you want me gone, I'll leave. But those cattle need feeding, the fence along the north pasture needs mending, and there's a leak in the barn roof. Your uncle cared about this place. I figured you might too." He turned and walked back toward the barn, his shoulders stiff. Tom cleared his throat. "He's telling the truth about him and his father. Folks say they had a falling out some years back. Beckett's been living rough, working where he can. Daniel took him in when most wouldn't." Olivia felt a flush of shame creep up her neck. She had judged him based on his name alone, the very thing she had asked him not to do to her. "Wait," she called out. "Mr. Kane, please wait." Beckett stopped but did not turn around immediately. When he did, his face was carefully blank. "I apologize," Olivia said, forcing herself to meet his eyes. They were blue, she noticed, a startling bright blue against his tanned skin. "That was unfair of me. I'm just overwhelmed by all of this. The lawyer told me about your father's claim on this land, and I assumed the worst when I heard your name." "My father's claim is false," Beckett said flatly. "Daniel would never have agreed to sell him any of this land. They argued about it constantly. That's what my father does, Miss Whitmore. He wants something and he finds a way to take it, legal or not. But you worked for him once. I was born on his ranch. Worked for him because he's my father and it was expected. Left when I couldn't stomach his methods anymore." Beckett's jaw tightened. "Look, you don't know me and you have no reason to trust me. I'll stay until you find someone else to help with the stock, but then I'll move on. I don't want to cause you trouble." "The cattle," Olivia said slowly. "You said they need feeding." "The grass is good now, but they need salt supplements, and they should be checked daily, make sure none are sick or injured." "Could you show me how to do that?" Beckett looked surprised. "You planning to stay?" "I don't know what I'm planning. But I came all this way and I'd like to understand what my uncle built here before I make any decisions." She straightened her shoulders. "Will you help me?" For the first time, something softened in Beckett's expression. "Yes, madam, I'll help you." Tom left after unloading Olivia's trunks in the cabin. The interior was simple but clean. A single room with a bed in one corner, a table and chairs, a stove and shelves lined with dishes and supplies. Someone, probably Beckett, had swept the floor and left fresh water in a bucket. A window looked out toward the creek, and through it, Olivia could see the cattle grazing peacefully. She unpacked a few things, changed from her traveling dress into something more practical, and ventured back outside. Beckett was in the barn, forking hay down from a loft. He had removed his jacket and she could see the strength in his arms as he worked. "What do you need me to do?" she asked. He paused, looking down at her from the loft. "You're serious about this?" "I am." "You ever been around cattle before?" "No, but I can learn." A hint of a smile touched his mouth. "All right then. First rule, cattle are bigger and stronger than you. Respect that. Don't get between them and something they want, and always leave yourself an exit." Over the next few hours, Beckett taught her the basics. How to move around the herd without startling them. How to spot signs of illness or injury. He showed her where the salt blocks were stored and how to check the water supply in the creek. His manner was patient and thorough, and Olivia found herself watching not just what he did, but how he moved through this world with an easy confidence she envied. As the sun began to sink toward the mountains, casting everything in golden light, they stood together by the creek. The water burbled over stones, and somewhere a bird sang a complex melody. "Your uncle loved this place," Beckett said quietly. "He used to stand right here and say it was the most peaceful spot on earth. Said after all his years of wandering he'd finally found home." "What was he like?" Olivia asked. "I barely remember him, just impressions really. He seemed very tall and he laughed a lot." He did laugh a lot, and he was fair, treated everyone decent regardless of who they were or where they came from. That's why he and my father clashed. Daniel wouldn't stand by while my father pushed smaller ranchers around, tried to control all the water rights in the territory. Beckett picked up a stone and tossed it into the creek. "Daniel testified against him once, in a dispute with a homesteader. My father never forgave him for that." "Is that why your father wants this land?" "Revenge, partly that, partly because it's good land with water. My father's always wanted to be the biggest, own the most. It's never enough for him." There was an old pain in Beckett's voice, something deep and unhealed. "What did you argue about?" "You and your father." Beckett was quiet for a long moment. "He wanted me to help him run off some homesteaders, a family with kids. I refused. He said if I wasn't with him, I was against him and I should get off his land. So I did. That must have been hard." "Hardest thing I ever did," Beckett admitted. "But I couldn't be the man he wanted me to be. I had to figure out who I was on my own terms." He turned to look at her, his blue eyes serious. "What about you? What made you come all this way? Just the inheritance?" Olivia considered lying, making it sound less desperate than it was. But something about this place, about him, made her want to tell the truth. "I was alone in Boston. My mother died, I had no other family, and I was barely surviving on what I earned as a seamstress. When the telegram came, it felt like a gift, like maybe I could have something more than just endless gray days of work and loneliness." She looked out at the valley, the mountains beyond. "This is so different from anything I've known. It frightens me, but it also makes me feel alive in a way I haven't felt in years. You thinking about keeping it then?" "I don't know if I can. Your father, the lawyer's warnings, this whole complicated situation. I don't know anything about ranching or survival out here." "It would be foolish to try." "Maybe," Beckett said. "Or maybe you're tougher than you think. Your uncle was from back east too. He figured it out." That night, Olivia lay in the narrow bed her uncle had slept in, listening to unfamiliar sounds. The wind moved through the trees with a rushing sound like water. Animals called to each other in the darkness. Through the window, she could see more stars than she had imagined existed, scattered across the sky in a glittering blanket. The vastness of it all made her feel small and significant at the same time. She thought about Beckett, asleep in the barn where he had apparently been living since her uncle died. There was something about him that unsettled her, though not in a frightening way. It was more that she found herself watching him, noticing the way he moved, the rare smile that transformed his serious face. She barely knew him. He was her uncle's hired hand, the son of a man who threatened her claim to this property. Getting attached would be foolish. But as she drifted toward sleep, she found herself hoping he would not leave, that he would stay and keep teaching her about this strange new world she had entered. The next morning, Beckett knocked on the cabin door just after dawn. When Olivia emerged, still half asleep, he was holding 2 tin cups of coffee. "Figured you might need this," he said, handing her one. The coffee was strong and bitter, but the warmth was welcome in the cool morning air. They drank in companionable silence, watching the sun creep over the mountains and spill light across the valley. "I need to ride out and check the far pasture today," Beckett said. "You want to come?" "On a horse?" Olivia tried to keep the nervousness from her voice. "That's generally how it's done. You ride before. Once, at a friend's estate when I was a girl, I fell off. Everyone falls off eventually. The trick is getting back on." He studied her face. "I've got a gentle mare that would suit you, but if you'd rather stay here, that's fine too." Olivia thought about the long day alone in the cabin, waiting, wondering. "I'll come." The mare was named Rosie, a stocky bay with kind eyes. Beckett showed Olivia how to approach her, how to hold the reins, how to sit in the saddle. His hands were gentle but firm as he adjusted her position, and she found herself acutely aware of his nearness, the warmth of his touch even through her sleeve. They rode slowly at first, Beckett on a tall roan gelding, Olivia on Rosie, who plodded along patiently. As they left the immediate area around the cabin, the land opened up before them. Beckett pointed out landmarks. A distinctive lightning-struck pine, a rock formation that looked like a sleeping bear, the boundary line where Daniel's property met the next ranch. "That's the riverside spread," Beckett said, gesturing east. Belongs to a widow named Sarah Douglas. She and Daniel were friendly, helped each other out when needed. You'll meet her eventually. She's good people. They rode higher into the hills, and Olivia began to feel more comfortable in the saddle. The rhythmic movement became almost soothing, and from this vantage point, she could see how Daniel's land lay in the landscape. The creek was the spine of it, giving life to everything around it. There, Beckett said, pointing to where a fence line crossed a slope. Several posts were down and the wire sagged. That's what needs fixing. This is the north boundary. My father's land is on the other side. They dismounted and Beckett pulled tools from his saddlebag. As he worked on the fence, Olivia held post steady and handed him nails when he asked. It was physical work, and she felt it in her back and shoulders, but there was something satisfying about it too. They were fixing something, making it right. "Tell me about my uncle," she said as they worked. "What did he do for fun?" Beckett hammered a nail before answering. "He read a lot, had a whole shelf of books in that cabin. He'd lend them to me, and we'd talk about them sometimes in the evenings. He liked Shakespeare and Mark Twain and this one poet, Walt Whitman. He'd quote passages while we worked. I didn't see any books in the cabin. They're in the barn in a trunk. I packed them away to keep them safe." Beckett tested the post, making sure it was solid. "I can bring them to the cabin if you want." "Yes, please, I'd like that." They worked in silence for a while, the only sounds the clang of Beckett's hammer and the whisper of wind through grass. Then Olivia said, "Can I ask you something? It might be too personal. You can ask. Can't promise I'll answer. Do you ever miss him, your father?" Beckett stopped hammering. For a moment she thought he would not respond. Then he said, "I miss who I wanted him to be. The idea of a father, someone who'd be proud of you for doing the right thing instead of just for doing what he wants. But the actual man, no, I don't miss him. I'm sorry. Don't be. I made my choice and I'd make it again." He looked at her directly. "Some people can't see past their own ambitions. They'll hurt anyone who gets in their way, even family. I didn't want to become that." "You're nothing like that," Olivia said, surprising herself with her certainty. "How do you know? You've known me less than 2 days." "I don't know. I just feel it." Something passed between them in that moment, a recognition that went deeper than words. Beckett held her gaze, and Olivia felt her heart beat faster. Then he looked away, back to the fence, but she thought she saw color rise in his cheeks beneath his tan. They finished the repairs and rode back as the sun climbed toward noon. When they reached the cabin, a horse was tied outside, and a man stood on the porch. He was older, maybe 50, with silver streaking his dark hair and an air of authority in the way he stood. "That's my father," Beckett said quietly, and his entire body went tense. Bradford Kane turned as they approached. He was a handsome man, well-dressed in a way that suggested wealth, and his eyes, the same blue as his son's, were sharp and assessing. "Beckett," he said, nodding curtly. Then to Olivia with a warm smile that did not reach his eyes, "You must be Miss Whitmore. I'm Bradford Kane. I wanted to welcome you to Montana Territory and express my condolences for your loss." Olivia dismounted, grateful when her legs held steady. "Thank you, Mr. Kane. I also wanted to discuss the matter of your uncle's property. I believe my attorney has been in touch with yours. He mentioned you have some sort of claim, yes?" "A legitimate claim, Miss Whitmore. Your uncle and I had an agreement. He was going to sell me the northern section of this property, 1,000 acres. We shook hands on it." Bradford's voice was smooth, reasonable. "I understand this must be overwhelming for you, coming from the city to deal with such matters. I'd be happy to take the entire property off your hands. I'll pay a fair price, more than fair. You could return to Boston with enough money to live comfortably for years." "My uncle didn't want to sell to you." Beckett's voice cut through his father's practiced speech. He told you no a dozen times. I wasn't speaking to you, boy. This is business between me and Miss Whitmore. Don't call me boy, and she should know the truth. You're trying to steal her land, same way you've tried to push out everyone else who won't bend to your will. Bradford's expression hardened. You always were an ungrateful whelp. I gave you everything and you threw it back in my face. You gave me nothing I wanted to keep. The tension between them was palpable, crackling like electricity before a storm. Olivia found her voice. Mr. Kane, I appreciate your offer, but I'm not ready to make any decisions about the property yet. I've only just arrived. Of course, of course. Bradford's smile returned, though it seemed more forced now. Take your time, look things over. But I should warn you, Miss Whitmore, running a ranch is no business for a woman alone. This is hard country. It breaks people who aren't prepared for it. His eyes flicked to Beckett. And you should be careful who you trust. Some people have their own agendas. With that, he mounted his horse and rode off, leaving a wake of unease behind him. He'll be back, Beckett said quietly, and next time he might not be so polite. What will he do? Try to intimidate you? Maybe send his men to cause trouble, make it harder for you to keep the place running. He wants you to give up, sell to him for cheap, or just abandon the property so he can claim it. Beckett's jaw was tight. I'm sorry. This is my fault. If I had a different name, different blood, maybe he'd leave you alone. This isn't your fault. You didn't choose your father any more than I chose mine. Olivia touched his arm, feeling the tension in his muscles. Don't leave, please. I need your help, and not just with the cattle. I need someone I can trust, and for reasons I can't fully explain, I trust you. Beckett looked down at where her hand rested on his arm, then up to her face. You might regret that, maybe, but I'd regret it more if I let him win without even trying to fight. Over the following weeks, Olivia threw herself into learning everything she could about ranch life. Beckett proved to be a patient teacher, showing her how to care for the cattle, maintain the property, and handle the 100 small tasks that made up each day. She learned to read the weather in the shape of clouds, to spot a sick cow before symptoms became obvious, to mend tack and chop wood and coax a fire from damp kindling her hands, soft from years of needlework, developed calluses and cuts. Her skin, always protected from the Boston sun, darkened despite her bonnet. She ached in muscles she had not known she possessed, but she also felt herself growing stronger, more capable. Each small accomplishment, from successfully saddling Rosie on her own to helping Beckett treat a cow with a minor injury, filled her with pride. And as she learned about the ranch, she learned about Beckett. Not through direct questions, which he deflected with the skill of long practice, but through observation and the small stories that emerged naturally as they worked side by side. She learned that he had a gift with animals, a quiet way of moving and speaking that calmed even the most skittish creatures. She learned that he carved small figures from wood in the evenings, horses and deer and birds, with a delicate precision that seemed at odds with his rough hands. She learned that he had a sister somewhere in California, married to a merchant, and that he sent her letters but rarely received replies. She also learned the sound of his laugh, rare but genuine, usually prompted by her own mistakes. Like the time she tried to milk the cow they kept for fresh dairy and ended up splattered with milk and manure. Or when she attempted to demonstrate her newfound riding skills, and Rosie simply stopped walking and refused to move, despite all of Olivia's commands. You have to mean it, Beckett said, barely containing his amusement. She can tell you're not sure. I am sure. I want her to go forward. Then tell her like you believe it. Olivia kicked her heels more firmly, made her voice more commanding, and Rosie, with what seemed like an equine sigh, started walking. Beckett did laugh then, a full, warm sound that made Olivia laugh too, despite her frustration. In those moments, she would catch herself staring at him, noticing the way his eyes crinkled when he smiled, the line of his jaw, the way his hair curled slightly at the nape of his neck where it needed cutting. She would feel a flutter in her chest, a warmth that had nothing to do with the sun. And sometimes, she would catch him looking at her in return, his expression unguarded for just a moment before he looked away. They danced around each other, careful and cautious, neither willing to risk breaking the fragile thing growing between them. Sarah Douglas visited on a sunny morning in early May. She arrived in a wagon driven by a young man she introduced as her son, Luke. Sarah was in her 40s, with gray-streaked brown hair and a face weathered by sun and hard work. Luke was perhaps 19, with his mother's direct gaze and a friendly smile. "Daniel was a good friend to me," Sarah said, sitting at the table in Olivia's cabin, accepting a cup of coffee. "When my husband died 5 years back, Daniel helped me keep my place running. Loaned me a bull, helped with roundup, never asked for anything in return. I wanted to make sure you knew that if you need anything, you can call on me." "That's very kind of you," Olivia said, warming to this straightforward woman. "I also wanted to warn you. Bradford Kane has been spreading rumors in town, saying you're planning to sell. Says you can't handle ranch work, that you'll give up and go back east within a month." Olivia felt a spike of anger. "I've been here 3 weeks and I haven't said any such thing." "I figured as much. That's why I'm here. I wanted to let you know that some of us smaller ranchers, we stick together. If Kane tries anything, you won't be facing him alone." Sarah glanced out the window to where Beckett was working with Luke, showing him something about the barn door that had been sticking. "And I'm glad you've got Beckett helping you. He's a good man, no matter whose blood he's got. You know him, known him since he was little. His mother, God rest her, was a sweet woman. Bradford Kane married her for her family's land, then worked her half to death. She passed when Beckett was about 14. After that, Bradford got meaner, harder. I think Beckett reminds him of what he lost, and he can't stand it." This glimpse into Beckett's past made Olivia's heart ache. She wanted to ask more, but Sarah was already standing, preparing to leave. "You come to the town social next week," Sarah said. "It's just a dance and some food, but it'll give you a chance to meet more folks. Let them see you're serious about staying." After Sarah and Luke left, Olivia found Beckett mending a harness outside the barn. She sat down on a nearby log, watching his hands work the leather. "Sarah told me about your mother," she said quietly. "I'm sorry." Beckett's hands stilled for a moment, then continued their work. "It was a long time ago. Still, it must have been hard. Losing her and then being alone with your father. It taught me that you can't count on people staying, no matter how much you love them. Everyone leaves eventually, one way or another." He did not look up from the harness, but she heard the pain beneath his matter-of-fact tone. "Not everyone leaves by choice," Olivia said. "Your mother didn't want to leave you. No, but she's still gone. The reason doesn't change the result." Olivia understood then one reason for his careful distance, his reluctance to get too close. He was protecting himself from another loss. "I'm not planning to leave," she said. "I know you probably don't believe that, and maybe I'll fail and have to, but I'm going to try my hardest to make this work." He did look up then, his blue eyes searching her face. "Why? Why is this place worth fighting for?" "Because it's mine. Because my uncle built something here and he wanted me to have it. Because for the first time in my life, I feel like I'm part of something bigger than just surviving day to day." She hesitated, then added, "And because I like the person I'm becoming here." "Who's that?" "Someone stronger. Someone who can do hard things. Someone who's not alone." She met his gaze. "You've helped me find that person, Beckett. I hope you know that. Color rose in his face, and he looked down again, but she saw a small smile touch his lips. You were always that person. You just needed a chance to prove it. The night of the town social, Olivia dressed in her best dress, a deep blue cotton that brought out her eyes. She had not worn it since leaving Boston, and it felt strange to be in something other than work clothes. She did her hair in a simple style, letting it wave down her back, and allowed herself a moment of vanity, checking her reflection in the small mirror. Beckett had cleaned up too, shaving off several days' growth of beard and wearing a clean shirt. His hair was still damp from washing, and he looked younger, less guarded. When he saw her emerge from the cabin, his eyes widened slightly. "You look nice," he said, then seemed embarrassed by the inadequacy of the words. "Real nice." "Thank you, so do you." They rode into town together as the sun set, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose. The social was held in the largest building in Copper Ridge, a combination church and community hall. Music spilled from the open doors, a fiddle and a guitar playing a lively tune. People milled outside, talking and laughing, and children ran between them in some complex game. Olivia felt nervous as they approached. All these people, most of whom probably knew each other, and she was the outsider, the city woman trying to play at being a rancher. She felt Beckett's hand on her elbow, steadying her. "It'll be fine," he said quietly. "Just be yourself." Inside, Sarah Douglas waved them over, introducing Olivia to what seemed like dozens of people. There was the blacksmith, Thomas, and his wife, Ellen. The general store owner, Mr. Chen, whose wife ran the boarding house where Olivia had stayed her first night. The doctor, an older man named Patrick with kind eyes. A few other ranchers, some homesteaders, a group of women who ran the town's school. Most were friendly, curious about the woman who had inherited Daniel Whitmore's place. A few were more reserved, clearly waiting to see if she would last. And a few, Olivia noticed, went quiet when they saw Beckett, their expressions turning cold or carefully blank. "They blame him for his father's actions," Sarah said quietly, noticing Olivia's observation. "It's not fair, but people are complicated." Olivia felt a surge of protectiveness. She stayed close to Beckett, making it clear by her presence that she did not share their judgment. When someone snubbed him, she made a point of engaging them in conversation, mentioning how helpful Beckett had been, how much he had taught her. When the dancing began, Olivia was pulled into a reel by Sarah's son Luke, who proved to be an enthusiastic if not particularly skilled dancer. Then the doctor claimed her for a waltz, and after him, the blacksmith Thomas. She was breathless and laughing by the time she finally had a break, accepting a glass of punch from one of the church ladies. Beckett stood against the wall, watching but not participating. Olivia made her way to him. "Why aren't you dancing?" she asked. "Not much good at it, and not many would say yes if I asked." "I would." He looked at her in surprise. "You've been dancing non-stop. You must be tired. One more won't hurt. Unless you really don't want to." For a moment she thought he would refuse. Then he straightened, offering his hand. "One dance." He led her onto the floor as the musicians began a slower tune, something gentle and sweet. Beckett's hand was warm on her waist, his other hand engulfing hers. He was not a polished dancer, but he moved with the same quiet confidence he brought to everything else, and Olivia found herself following his lead easily. "See," she said, "you're good at this, or you're easy to dance with." They moved together, and Olivia was acutely aware of how close they were, closer than they had been even during their work together. She could feel the warmth of his body, smell the clean scent of soap, and something underneath that was just him. Her heart was beating fast, and she knew it had nothing to do with the dancing. When she looked up, she found him watching her with an expression that made her breath catch. There was longing there, barely restrained, and something tender that made her chest ache. "Olivia," he said softly, her name a question and a confession all at once. But before she could respond, there was a commotion at the door. Bradford Kane entered with several of his men, their presence changing the atmosphere in the room immediately. Conversations faltered. The music stuttered to a stop. Bradford's gaze swept the room and landed on Beckett and Olivia, still standing together on the dance floor. His expression hardened. "Beckett," he said loudly, his voice carrying through the now silent hall. "I heard you were still hanging around the Whitmore place. Surprised you haven't moved on yet. You never were one for sticking with anything." Beckett's jaw tightened, but he said nothing, beginning to guide Olivia off the floor, but Bradford was not finished. "Of course, I suppose the company is more appealing than usual. Pretty young woman from the city, all alone. I imagine you're filling her head with all sorts of ideas, playing the helpful ranch hand." His smile was cruel. "Tell me, Miss Whitmore, has he mentioned that he's never managed to hold down a job for more than a few months? That most folks won't hire him because they know he's unreliable?" "That's a lie," Sarah Douglas said sharply, stepping forward. "Beckett worked for Daniel for 2 years steady, and he's helped out half the folks in this room at one time or another." "For pay?" Bradford asked. "Or just out of the goodness of his heart? Because I know I taught him better than to work for free. Maybe he's got other motivations. Maybe he's hoping if he makes himself indispensable, he can get his hands on that property when Miss Whitmore gives up and leaves." Olivia felt Beckett go rigid beside her. Before he could respond, she stepped forward, her voice clear and firm. "Mr. Kane, I don't know what you're trying to accomplish here, but it won't work. Beckett has been nothing but honest and helpful to me. Whatever issues you have with your son, they don't give you the right to slander him publicly." "Issues?" Bradford's face darkened. "The boy turned his back on his family, on everything I built. He's ungrateful and disloyal, and you'd be wise to keep your distance from him." "No," Beckett said, his voice low but clear. "I turned my back on a bully who cares more about power than people. You taught me that some things are more important than money or land, though you didn't mean to. You taught me what kind of man I never want to become." Father and son stared at each other, years of pain and anger crackling between them. Then Bradford said, "You always were weak, just like your mother. She couldn't handle ranch life either. It killed her." The words were designed to wound, and they hit their mark. Olivia saw Beckett flinch as though struck. But then, to her amazement, he straightened his shoulders and said, "You're right. She couldn't handle you. No one should have to, but she was strong in ways you'll never understand. She was kind and gentle, and she saw the best in people even when they didn't deserve it. I'm proud to be her son. I'm not proud to be yours." With that, he turned and walked out of the hall, leaving Bradford standing there, his face mottled with rage. Olivia hurried after Beckett, catching up with him outside where he stood in the darkness, his hands clenched at his sides. "Beckett," she said gently, "you should go back inside. You came to meet people, make connections. Don't let me ruin that for you. You didn't ruin anything. Your father did." She moved to stand in front of him, forcing him to look at her. "What he said about you, about your mother, those were the words of a bitter, cruel man. They don't reflect the truth. Don't they? Maybe he's right. Maybe I am using you, staying close because I want something." "What do you want?" Olivia asked, her heart pounding. He looked at her then, really looked at her, and she saw everything in his eyes. Want and fear, longing and restraint. "Something I have no right to," he said roughly. "You deserve better than a ranch hand with nothing to his name and a father who'll make your life hell just for the association. Shouldn't I get to decide what I deserve? Olivia, you don't understand. My father won't stop. If he thinks there's something between us, he'll use it. He'll hurt you to get at me. Let him try." She reached up, cupping his face with her palm, feeling the scratch of stubble, the warmth of his skin. I'm not afraid of him. I'm only afraid of losing you because I was too scared to take a risk. You barely know me. I know enough. I know you're good and decent and brave. I know you make me feel safe and challenged all at once. I know that when I look at you, I feel things I've never felt before, and it terrifies me in the best way. Her voice dropped to a whisper. I know I'm falling in love with you. He made a sound, something between a groan and a sigh, and then his hand came up to cover hers where it rested on his face. I've been fighting this, he said. From the first day when you stepped down from that wagon looking lost and determined all at once. I told myself you'd leave, that there was no point in caring. But you stayed. You worked until your hands bled, learned everything I taught you, stood up to my father. You're the strongest person I've ever met, and I can't fight this anymore. Then don't, Olivia said. He leaned down slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted. But she did not want to. She rose on her toes, meeting him halfway, and when their lips finally touched, it felt like coming home. The kiss was gentle at first, tentative, two people learning each other. Then it deepened, becoming something more urgent, more real. His arms came around her, pulling her close, and she pressed against him, her hands sliding into his hair. The world fell away until there was nothing but this, the two of them and the truth they had finally admitted. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Beckett rested his forehead against hers. I love you, he said. I think I've loved you from the moment you demanded to learn about cattle care, even though you were clearly exhausted and scared. Olivia laughed shakily. That's an odd moment to fall in love. Maybe. But it was when I first saw the real you, the person underneath the city manners, strong and stubborn and unwilling to give up. He kissed her again softly. I'm not a good bet, Olivia. I have nothing to offer you but hard work and a complicated family situation. You have yourself to offer, and that's everything I want. She smiled up at him. Besides, I'm not such a good bet either. I'm a city girl playing at rancher, fighting a legal battle I might lose, with no experience and no real plan beyond sheer determination. Sounds like a perfect match then, Beckett said, and for the first time since she had known him, he smiled fully, unreservedly, and it transformed his face into something beautiful. They stood together in the darkness, holding each other until Sarah Douglas emerged from the hall. You two all right out here? We're fine, Olivia said. Better than fine. Sarah looked between them and smiled knowingly. Good. Bradford left in a huff and folks inside are asking after you, but if you'd rather head home, I'd understand. We should go back in, Olivia decided. I won't let him drive us away. They returned to the social together, hand in hand, making no secret of their connection. There were surprised looks, some approving, some concerned. But there were also smiles, nods of support from Sarah and Luke and others who had come to respect both of them. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of music and conversation. Olivia danced with Beckett several more times, and each time felt like a declaration, a statement to everyone watching that she had made her choice and she stood by it. As they rode home under a sky brilliant with stars, Beckett said, My father really will come after us now, after you. He'll see this as me trying to get the property through you. Then he doesn't understand either of us very well, Olivia replied. This property is mine and I'm going to fight to keep it. Not for you, not against him, but for me, for my uncle's memory, for the life I want to build here. I'll help you fight. I know you will. Together, we're stronger than apart. He reached across the space between their horses and took her hand. Together. The challenges came quickly. 2 days after the social, they discovered that someone had cut the fence on the southern boundary, letting half their cattle wander onto neighboring property. It took a full day to round them up and repair the damage. The following week, their hay supplier in town suddenly refused to sell to them, claiming he was sold out, though Beckett knew for a fact he had plenty. When they found another supplier, that one raised his prices by nearly double. "It's my father," Beckett said grimly. "He's putting pressure on people, making it harder for you to operate. Can he do that? Just intimidate everyone into refusing to do business with us. He's got money and influence. Some people owe him favors, some are scared of him. And some just figure it's easier to go along with him than to stand up to him." Beckett's frustration was evident. "I'm sorry, I brought this down on you. No, he did this, not you." Olivia was tired, dirty from a long day of fence work, and angry. "There has to be something we can do." "There is. You could sell to him, take whatever he's offering and walk away." "I'm not doing that." "I know," Beckett said, and despite the seriousness of the situation, he smiled slightly. "I wouldn't respect you as much if you did." They sat together on the porch as the sun set, shoulder to shoulder, taking what comfort they could from each other's presence. Inside, Olivia knew there was dinner to make, chores to finish, 100 small tasks. But for this moment, they simply sat and watched the light fade from the sky. "Tell me something happy," Olivia said. "Something from before all this, something good." Beckett thought for a moment. "When I was about 10, before my mother died, she taught me to dance, right there in the kitchen when my father was away. She hummed the tune and showed me the steps, and we laughed the whole time because I kept stepping on her feet." His voice was soft with memory. "She said someday I'd need to know how to dance for a woman I cared about, and she wanted to make sure I could do it right. I thought she was being silly, but now I'm glad I got to dance with you." Olivia leaned her head on his shoulder. "I'm glad too. Tell me more about her. What was her name?" "Margaret. Everyone called her Maggie. She had dark hair like mine and she loved flowers. Tried to grow a garden every year, even though the soil here is difficult and the weather unpredictable. Most years, she only got a few blooms, but she was so proud of them." He paused. "After she died, the garden went to weeds. My father said it was a waste of time and water. But I think he just couldn't stand the reminder." "I'd like to plant a garden," Olivia said. "For her and for me. Would you help me?" "Yes. When things settle down a bit, we'll do that." But things did not settle down. The harassment continued and escalated. Tools went missing from the barn. Someone poisoned one of the salt licks, sickening 3 cattle before they realized and removed it. Late one night, they heard gunshots and found someone had shot holes in the water trough, draining it completely. After that incident, Beckett started sleeping in the cabin instead of the barn, bedding down on the floor near the stove. "I don't like being that far away when there's trouble," he said, and Olivia did not argue. She felt safer with him close, even though the situation as a whole felt increasingly dangerous. They reported each incident to the sheriff, a heavy-set man named Morton, who listened with a face that showed nothing and promised to look into it. But nothing ever came of his investigations. Olivia suspected he was either in Bradford Kane's pocket or too intimidated to act against him. "We need proof," Beckett said after their third fruitless visit to the sheriff's office. "Something that ties these incidents directly to my father." "How do we get that?" "We catch them in the act." So they started taking turns keeping watch at night, one sleeping while the other sat up with a rifle and a lantern. It was exhausting, adding to the already heavy workload of running the ranch, but it was necessary. Olivia learned to function on little sleep, to push through fatigue and keep going. Her body grew leaner, harder. Her hands were rough and scarred. She barely recognized herself in the mirror, but she also felt more alive than ever before. Despite the danger and the exhaustion, despite the constant pressure, she was fighting for something that mattered. She was not just surviving anymore. She was living, and she was in love. That was the other thing that kept her going. Every morning she woke to find Beckett already up, starting coffee, moving quietly so as not to disturb her if she had been on watch. Every evening they sat together and talked about the day, planned for tomorrow, shared small moments of laughter even in the midst of struggle. He kissed her good night before they went to their separate sleeping places, his lips warm and gentle, and those kisses became the touchstone of her days. The legal battle dragged on. Mr. Peterson filed papers and Bradford Kane's attorneys filed counter papers. There were hearings and delays. Bradford still had not produced the supposed agreement with Daniel Whitmore, but his lawyers claimed they were searching for it among his extensive business documents. "He's stalling," Peterson explained, "making it as difficult and expensive as possible, hoping you'll give up." "I won't." "Miss Whitmore, I must advise you that the legal fees are mounting. If this continues, you may exhaust your resources before we reach a conclusion." "Then we'll have to force a conclusion," Olivia said. "What would it take to get this case in front of a judge immediately?" "Evidence that Kane's claim is fraudulent. If we could prove he never had such an agreement with your uncle, the judge would likely dismiss his claim." "My uncle kept records, didn't he? Books, ledgers." "Yes, I have them. But there's nothing in them that specifically addresses this supposed agreement. Could we get someone who knew my uncle to testify about his intentions? Someone who could speak to his character and his relationship with Bradford Kane?" Peterson looked thoughtful. "That might work. If we had several credible witnesses who could establish that your uncle had no intention of selling to Kane, it would undermine his claim." "Do you know anyone who might testify?" "Sarah Douglas," Olivia said immediately. "And her son Luke. Maybe some of the other ranchers my uncle was friendly with. They'd tell the truth." "Very well. I'll start preparing for a hearing. But Miss Whitmore, you should know that this will likely provoke Kane to more extreme measures. When men like him feel cornered, they become dangerous." Peterson's words proved prophetic. 2 days later, as Olivia and Beckett were working to move the cattle to a new pasture, a group of riders appeared on the ridgeline. There were 6 of them, all armed, all wearing the distinctive brand of the Kane Ranch on their hats. "Stay behind me," Beckett said quietly, positioning himself between Olivia and the approaching men. The riders fanned out as they came down the hill, a clear intimidation tactic. Their leader was a hard-faced man named Dutch who served as Bradford Kane's foreman. "Miss Whitmore," Dutch said, not dismounting. "Mr. Kane sent us to deliver a message. This land is going to be his one way or another. You can sell it and walk away with something, or you can keep fighting and lose everything. Your choice." "This is my property," Olivia said, fighting to keep her voice steady. "Your employer has no claim to it, and his attempts to intimidate me are illegal." "Illegal?" Dutch smiled unpleasantly. "Lot of accidents happen out here on the range, Miss Whitmore. Cattle wander off. Buildings catch fire. People get hurt. Be a shame if something happened to you or your hired hand here." "That's a threat," Beckett said. "You might want to be careful about making threats you can't back up." "I can back up anything I say, Kane, you know that." Dutch leaned forward in his saddle. "Your daddy's real disappointed in you, boy. Says you were supposed to help with this situation. Use your charm on the lady, get her to sell. Instead, you're playing house with her. That's not going to end well for either of you." Beckett's hand moved toward the rifle on his saddle, but Olivia touched his arm, stopping him. "I think you've delivered your message," she said to Dutch. "Now get off my property." Dutch laughed. "Your property? We'll see about that." He gestured to his men, and they turned their horses, riding back the way they had come. But before they disappeared over the ridge, one of them fired his gun into the air, spooking the cattle. The herd scattered, running in all directions, and it took Olivia and Beckett hours to gather them again. That night, they sat at the table in the cabin, both too keyed up to sleep despite their exhaustion. "He's escalating," Beckett said. "Next time it won't just be threats." "What are you saying?" "I'm saying maybe you should go back to town for a while. Stay at the boarding house where there are other people around. I'll keep working here, but at least you'd be safe." "Absolutely not. I'm not leaving you alone to face this. Olivia, if something happened to you because of me, because of my father's vendetta against me, I couldn't live with that." She reached across the table and took his hands. "And I couldn't live with myself if I ran away and left you to fight alone. We're in this together, remember, that's what we decided." "I know, but I didn't think it would get this dangerous. Life is dangerous. Love is dangerous." She squeezed his hands. "But it's also worth fighting for. You're worth fighting for." His eyes were bright in the lamplight, and she saw the emotion there, love and fear and determination all mixed together. "Marry me," he said suddenly. Olivia's breath caught. "What? Marry me?" "I know it's fast. I know we haven't known each other long, but I love you, and I don't want to wait any more. I don't want to waste time being cautious when we could be living." He stood, pulling her up with him. "I'm not proposing because of the danger or the situation with my father. I'm proposing because every day with you is better than any day before. Because when I imagine the future, you're in every part of it, because you make me want to be brave." Tears filled Olivia's eyes. "Yes," she said. "Yes, I'll marry you." He kissed her then, deep and thorough, and when they broke apart, both were smiling despite everything. "Tomorrow," Beckett said. "Let's get married tomorrow. There's a preacher in Copper Ridge and we have friends who'd stand up with us." "Tomorrow," Olivia agreed, laughing and crying at the same time. They were married the next afternoon in the little church in Copper Ridge. Sarah Douglas stood as witness for Olivia and Luke for Beckett. The preacher, a young man named David, performed a simple ceremony. Olivia wore her best dress, the blue one from the social, and Beckett wore his clean shirt and had shaved carefully. He put a simple gold band on her finger, one that had been his mother's, and when the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, the kiss they shared was sweet and full of promise. Sarah hosted a small celebration dinner at her ranch afterward, just a few close friends who had supported them. There was food and music and laughter, and for a few hours, they forgot about Bradford Kane and legal battles and the uncertain future. They were just two people starting their life together, surrounded by people who wished them well. That night, in the cabin that was now truly their home, Beckett carried Olivia over the threshold despite her laughing protests. He set her down gently, and they stood together in the lamplight, suddenly shy despite all they had been through. "I can't believe we're married," Olivia said softly. "I can't believe you said yes. I don't deserve you. Stop that. You deserve everything good." She reached up and kissed him, letting the kiss say what words could not, all the love and desire and commitment she felt. They came together with tenderness and passion, learning each other in new ways, making promises with touch and whisper. Outside, the wind moved through the trees and somewhere a coyote called to the moon, but inside, there was only warmth and connection and love. The hearing was set for 2 weeks later. In that time, Olivia and Beckett worked to gather support. Sarah Douglas agreed to testify, as did Luke. The doctor, Patrick, who had known Daniel Whitmore, agreed as well. Even Mr. Chen from the general store, who had sold supplies to Daniel for years, said he would speak on his behalf, but Bradford Kane was not idle either. The harassment intensified. Someone set fire to a small storage shed, though they managed to put it out before it spread. More fences were cut. One morning, they found one of their horses lamed, its leg deliberately injured. That was the incident that shook Olivia the most. The cruelty of it, the willingness to hurt an innocent animal, showed how far Bradford was willing to go. "I want to go after him," Beckett said, his anger barely contained as he tended to the injured horse. "I want to ride to his ranch and make him answer for this. That's what he wants. He's trying to provoke you into doing something rash so he can claim you're the violent one, the troublemaker." Olivia stood beside her husband, her hand on his shoulder. "We have to be smarter than that. We have to win the legal way. And if the law doesn't work, if he's bought off the judge like he has the sheriff, then we'll figure out something else. But we try this first." The day of the hearing arrived with unseasonable heat. The courtroom was packed with people from all over the territory, drawn by the drama of a land dispute and the involvement of Bradford Kane. The judge was a stern-looking man named Haroldson from Helena, brought in specifically because he had no prior connections to anyone involved. Mr. Peterson presented their case methodically. He showed Daniel Whitmore's records, demonstrating that there was no indication of any agreement to sell land to Bradford Kane. He called their witnesses one by one. Sarah Douglas testified that Daniel had repeatedly refused Bradford's offers and had no intention of ever selling to him. The doctor spoke to Daniel's character, describing him as an honest man who kept his word. Mr. Chen described the many conversations he'd had with Daniel about his plans for the property, plans that involved leaving it to his niece, not selling any part of it. Bradford Kane's attorney, a slick man from Denver, tried to discredit each witness, suggesting they had reasons to lie. But their testimony was consistent and believable. Then it was Bradford's turn to present his case. His attorney made vague claims about a gentleman's agreement, about conversations that had taken place without witnesses. But when Judge Haroldson pressed him to produce any written documentation of this agreement, he had to admit they had found none. "Your Honor," Bradford's attorney said smoothly, "the absence of written documentation does not mean the agreement did not exist. My client is a man of honor whose word has always been his bond." "And yet," Judge Haroldson said dryly, "we have multiple witnesses testifying that the deceased repeatedly refused to sell to your client. We have the deceased's own records showing no such agreement. And we have a convenient lack of any documentation on your side. This court deals in evidence, Mr. Hendricks, not in unsupported claims." Bradford stood then, his face red. "Your Honor, Daniel Whitmore and I shook hands on this deal. Just because he didn't live to finalize the paperwork doesn't mean it wasn't real." "Mr. Kane," the judge said, "do you have any witnesses to this alleged handshake agreement? It was between gentlemen. We didn't need witnesses. Convenient." Judge Haroldson looked through his papers. "I've heard enough. This court finds no credible evidence supporting Mr. Kane's claim to any portion of the Whitmore property. The property belongs entirely to Mrs. Olivia Kane, as Daniel Whitmore's sole heir. This case is dismissed." The courtroom erupted in noise. Olivia felt her knees go weak with relief. Beckett's arm came around her, holding her steady. They had won. The property was truly hers, free and clear. But as they left the courtroom, Bradford Kane blocked their path. His face was twisted with rage, all pretense of civility gone. "This isn't over," he said, his voice low and venomous. "You think you've won. You've won nothing. I'll ruin you both. I'll make sure neither of you has a moment's peace. And you," he turned to Beckett, "you're dead to me, you hear that? I have no son." "I've been dead to you for years," Beckett replied quietly. "The difference is now I'm free of you. We both are." Bradford looked as though he might strike Beckett, but the sheriff, who had been required to attend the hearing, stepped between them. "Mr. Kane, I'd suggest you go home and cool off." For a moment, it seemed Bradford might ignore the sheriff. Then he turned on his heel and strode away, his men following. But the look he cast back over his shoulder promised that this was far from finished. Despite the victory, Olivia and Beckett remained cautious. They continued their watch routine, continued checking fences and livestock carefully. But days passed, then a week, and there were no more incidents. Perhaps Bradford had finally accepted defeat, or perhaps he was planning something bigger. The answer came 2 weeks after the hearing. Olivia and Beckett had ridden out to check the north pasture, the one that bordered Bradford's land. As they approached the fence line, Beckett suddenly reined in his horse. "Smoke," he said, pointing. Olivia looked and felt her blood run cold. A column of black smoke rose from the direction of their cabin. "No," she breathed, and then they were riding hard, racing back across the hills. They saw the flames long before they reached the cabin. The barn was engulfed, fire leaping from the roof, smoke billowing. As they drew closer, Olivia realized with horror that the cabin was burning too, flames visible through the windows. Beckett was off his horse before it fully stopped, running toward the barn. "The animals!" he shouted. The cow they kept for milk was bellowing in terror, and they could hear the chickens' panicked clucking. Together, they managed to get the animals out, though the heat was almost unbearable. The cow bolted for safety, and the chickens scattered across the yard. By then, it was clear there was nothing they could do to save the buildings. They could only stand and watch as everything burned. Neighbors, seeing the smoke, began to arrive. Sarah Douglas and Luke, some of the homesteaders from nearby, even Mr. Chen from town. They formed a bucket brigade from the creek, not to save the buildings, which were clearly lost, but to keep the fire from spreading to the grass, which could ignite the whole valley. It took hours to ensure the fire was contained. By the time it was safe, both the cabin and the barn were reduced to smoking ruins. Everything Olivia had brought from Boston, her few precious belongings, her uncle's books, the furniture and tools and supplies they had accumulated, all of it was gone. Olivia stood staring at the destruction, too numb to cry. Beckett's arm was around her and he was saying something, but the words did not register. This was too much. This was beyond anything she had imagined. "It was Kane," Luke said angrily, standing beside them. "Had to be. This didn't just happen." "We can't prove it," the sheriff said, having arrived late to the scene. "Could have been an accident. Lamp tipped over, sparks from the stove." "We weren't here," Beckett said flatly. "There's no way this was an accident. Still have to prove it." The sheriff looked uncomfortable but firm. "Without proof, I can't arrest anyone." After everyone left, promising help and offering their homes, Beckett and Olivia stood alone in the ruins. The sun was setting, and the smoke-filled air turned the light red and ominous. "I can't do this anymore," Olivia said, her voice barely above a whisper. She felt completely hollowed out, empty. "He wins. I can't fight him anymore." "Yes, you can." Beckett turned her to face him, his hands on her shoulders. "I know it seems impossible right now, but we can rebuild. We have the land, we have the cattle, we have each other. But where will we live? What will we do? Everything is gone. We'll stay with Sarah until we can build a new cabin. We'll borrow tools, buy supplies on credit. Olivia, listen to me. If you give up now, if you let him win, then everything we've fought for was for nothing. Daniel's legacy, our future together, all of it ends here. Is that what you want?" She looked at him, at this man she had married, who had stood beside her through everything. His face was streaked with soot, his eyes red from smoke, his hands blistered from fighting the fire. He had nothing left either, but he was still standing, still fighting. "No," she said, feeling something harden inside her, anger replacing despair. "That's not what I want. I want to stay. I want to rebuild, and I want to make sure Bradford Kane never does this to anyone else. Then we fight. Then we fight." They spent that night at Sarah's ranch, exhausted and soot-stained. Sarah gave them clean clothes and fed them and asked no questions beyond what they needed. Her quiet support meant everything. The next morning, Beckett rode to his father's ranch. Olivia wanted to go with him, but he insisted she stay behind. "This is between me and him," he said. "One way or another, I'm going to end this." She waited in terror, imagining every terrible possibility. What if Bradford hurt him? What if Beckett pushed too far, did something that landed him in jail? The hours dragged by with agonizing slowness. When Beckett finally returned, it was mid-afternoon. His expression was grim but satisfied. "What happened?" Olivia asked, rushing to meet him. "I told him I'd go to every newspaper in the territory and tell them exactly what he did. Burn down his own son's home, destroy the property of a woman who'd legally won her case in court. I told him I'd make sure everyone knew what kind of man he really was, that I'd ruin his reputation if he ever came near you or our property again." And what did he say? He denied it, of course. But he also heard me. And I made sure his men heard me too. Let them know that I'd name anyone who helped with this, that they'd be accessories to arson and attempted murder if anything else happened. Beckett's jaw was tight. "He knows I'm serious. I think he'll back off now." "You think?" "I can't promise. But I made it clear that the cost of continuing would be too high. My father values his reputation above almost everything. The threat of public scandal might be enough." Olivia wanted to believe it, but she was afraid to hope. "And what about us? How do we rebuild?" "We start tomorrow." Beckett took her hands. "I've got some money saved, enough for materials. Folks have already offered to help with the building. We can have a new cabin up in a few weeks, a barn not long after. It won't be easy, but we can do it." Over the following weeks, the community rallied around them in a way that restored Olivia's faith in humanity. Men came from neighboring ranches to help raise the new cabin. Women brought food and supplies. Someone donated furniture they no longer needed. Mr. Chen extended them credit at the store. Even the bank, hearing what had happened, offered a small loan at favorable terms. The new cabin rose slowly but steadily on the same site as the old one. They built it larger this time, with 2 rooms instead of 1, a proper bedroom separate from the main living space. They dug a new foundation for the barn and began work on that as well. Through it all, Olivia and Beckett worked side by side. They were building more than just structures. They were building their future, their life together. Each nail driven, each board placed, was an act of defiance against those who had tried to break them. And Bradford Kane, true to Beckett's prediction, made no more direct moves against them. There were no more incidents, no more harassment. Olivia sometimes saw his men watching from a distance, but they never approached. The old man had been beaten, not by force, but by the stubborn determination of a woman who refused to give up and a son who had finally found something worth fighting for. 2 months after the fire, they moved into their new cabin. It still smelled of fresh lumber and the floorboards creaked in unfamiliar ways, but it was theirs. That first night they sat on their new porch, watching the sun set over their valley. "I was thinking," Olivia said, leaning against Beckett's shoulder, "maybe we should plant that garden now." "For your mother, I'd like that. What should we plant? Roses, I think, and maybe some wildflowers. Things that are beautiful but tough, that can survive in harsh conditions." Beckett kissed the top of her head. "Sounds perfect." As autumn approached, bringing cooler days and the first hints of changing leaves, Olivia realized she was pregnant. She told Beckett on a crisp September evening, and the joy on his face made her laugh and cry at the same time. "A baby," he kept saying, as though he could not quite believe it. "We're going to have a baby. Are you happy?" Happy doesn't even begin to cover it. He pulled her into his arms. "I'm terrified and thrilled and amazed. You're going to be an incredible mother." And you'll be an incredible father, nothing like yours. You'll be everything a father should be." The pregnancy was not easy. Morning sickness plagued Olivia through the first months, and the work of the ranch did not stop just because she was carrying a child. But Beckett was endlessly patient and supportive, taking on more of the heavy work, making sure she rested, worrying over her with an intensity that was both touching and occasionally exasperating. "I'm not made of glass," she protested when he tried to stop her from mucking out the horse stall. "No, but you're carrying our child and I'm not taking any chances." Winter came, blanketing their valley in snow. The work changed with the season, less about fences and fields and more about keeping the stock fed and safe from the cold. They spent long evenings by the fire, Beckett carving a cradle from pine, while Olivia sewed tiny clothes from fabric Sarah had given her. Bradford Kane stayed away, though they heard occasional news of him in town. He had lost some of his influence after the hearing, with people beginning to question his methods. Several of his smaller neighbors had banded together to resist his attempts at expansion. He was still powerful, still wealthy, but his reputation had taken a hit from which it might never fully recover. "You ever regret it?" Olivia asked Beckett one snowy evening. "Walking away from all that money and power?" "Not for a second. I'd rather have this life, with you, than any amount of wealth tied to his name." He looked up from the cradle he was sanding. "This baby will grow up knowing love and honesty. That's worth more than any inheritance." In early spring, as the snow melted and the first green shoots appeared, Olivia went into labor. It was long and difficult, with Sarah and the doctor in attendance. Beckett paced outside, prevented from entering by Sarah's firm insistence that birthing was women's work. But when it was over, when Sarah emerged with a smile and beckoned him in, he rushed to Olivia's side. She lay exhausted but radiant, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in soft cloth. "A son," she said softly. "We have a son." Beckett looked down at the small, red face of his child and felt something break open in his chest. Love, pure and overwhelming, flooded through him. "He's perfect," he whispered. "What should we name him?" "I was thinking, Daniel, after my uncle, if that's all right with you." "It's perfect." "Daniel Kane." Beckett gently touched his son's tiny hand, marveling when the baby's fingers curled around his. "Hello, Daniel. I'm your father, and I promise I'll do everything I can to be worthy of you." Little Daniel proved to be a good baby, crying only when hungry or uncomfortable, sleeping in peaceful stretches that allowed Olivia to recover her strength. Beckett was besotted, spending hours just watching the baby sleep, marveling at each tiny movement and sound. As spring turned to summer, they fell into new rhythms. Olivia found she could work with Daniel strapped to her back in a carrier Sarah had made, the baby content to watch the world from this high perch. The ranch was thriving, their herd growing, their land productive. They hired a young man named Paul to help with some of the heavier work, giving them more time to focus on their son and each other. One warm June evening, nearly 2 years after Olivia had first arrived in Montana Territory, they stood together in the garden they had planted. Roses climbed a trellis Beckett had built, their blooms heavy and fragrant. Wildflowers spread in colorful patches, attracting butterflies and bees. Daniel toddled between the plants, his chubby hands reaching for flowers, his laughter like music. "Do you ever think about what your life would have been like if you hadn't come here?" Beckett asked, his arm around Olivia's waist. "Sometimes. I'd probably still be in Boston, sewing in bad light, alone, barely surviving. I'd have missed all of this." She looked at their son, at the land around them, at her husband's beloved face. "I came here to claim an inheritance, and I got so much more than land. I got a home, a family, a love I didn't even know was possible." I got the same thing, Beckett said. I was just existing before you came, day to day, no real purpose beyond the next job. You gave me a reason to fight, to hope, to believe I could be more than my father's son. Daniel chose that moment to fall down, landing hard on his bottom. For a second he looked shocked, then his face crumpled and he began to cry. Both parents hurried to him, scooping him up, checking for injuries, soothing his tears with kisses and gentle words. "You're all right," Olivia murmured, brushing dirt from his knees. "You're all right, sweet boy." Daniel's cries quickly turned to hiccups, and then stopped altogether as he became distracted by a butterfly that landed on Beckett's shoulder. His eyes went wide with wonder and he reached for it, his earlier upset completely forgotten. "Resilient," Beckett said, smiling. "Just like his mother." "Like both his parents," Olivia corrected. That night, after Daniel was asleep in his cradle, Olivia and Beckett lay in their bed, the window open to let in the cool night air. Olivia's head rested on Beckett's chest, his heart beat steady beneath her ear. "We should expand the cabin again," Beckett said thoughtfully. "Daniel will need his own room eventually." "Are you thinking about eventually, or are you thinking about sooner?" Olivia asked, smiling. "What do you mean?" She took his hand and placed it on her stomach. "I mean, I think Daniel might be getting a brother or sister in about 7 months. Beckett sat up so quickly he nearly dumped her out of bed. "You're pregnant again? Already? Is that a problem?" No, it's wonderful. It's just we have a baby who will be almost 2 by the time the next one comes. That's not so bad." Olivia sat up too, trying to read his expression in the dim light. "You are happy about this, aren't you?" "I'm thrilled. I'm just also terrified. What if something goes wrong? What if you need something and I can't provide it? What if I'm not a good enough father for 2 children?" "Beckett Kane," Olivia said firmly, taking his face in her hands. "You are an excellent father. Daniel adores you and this baby will too. We'll figure it out together, just like we've figured out everything else." He kissed her then, deeply, and when they broke apart, he was smiling. "2 children. We're going to have 2 children. At least 2. I'm thinking maybe 4 or 5 eventually. 5. Are you trying to give me a heart condition? I'm trying to build a family. A big, noisy, loving family. The kind neither of us had growing up." She kissed him again. "Don't you want that?" "I want whatever makes you happy. And yes, I want that too. A house full of life and love. Everything I never thought I'd have." The second baby, a daughter they named Margaret after Beckett's mother, arrived in early spring. She had her father's blue eyes and her mother's determined spirit, announcing her presence in the world with a lusty cry that suggested she would never be ignored. Daniel, nearly 2, was fascinated by his baby sister, wanting to touch her constantly, to hold her, to bring her his favorite toys. They had to watch him carefully to make sure his enthusiastic affection did not overwhelm the infant, but his love for her was obvious and touching. As the years passed, the ranch continued to grow and prosper. They added more cattle, built additional outbuildings, hired more help. Paul, who had started as a young hand, became their foreman, loyal and hardworking. They developed a reputation for fair dealing and quality stock, and buyers came from across the territory to purchase their cattle. Olivia became known in the community as a woman to be reckoned with, someone who had faced down Bradford Kane and survived. Other women, particularly widows and those trying to make their own way, came to her for advice and support. She helped where she could, remembering what it felt like to be alone and uncertain. Bradford Kane aged badly. Without his son to eventually inherit his empire, and with his reputation tarnished, he became bitter and isolated. He still ran his massive ranch, but the fire had gone out of him. When Beckett occasionally saw him in town, the old man looked away, unable or unwilling to acknowledge his son's existence. Does it still hurt?" Olivia asked after one such encounter. "Seeing him pretend you don't exist, less than it used to," Beckett admitted. "I have everything that matters. He has nothing but land and money, and those are cold comforts when you're alone." 3 more children followed Margaret over the years, 2 boys and another girl. The cabin was expanded twice more, growing into a proper house. The noise and chaos of 5 children filled every room, exactly as Olivia had imagined. There were scraped knees to bandage, quarrels to mediate, tears to dry, and endless laughter. It was exhausting and wonderful, and everything she had never dared to dream of. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Beckett surprised Olivia by taking her on a ride up to the ridge that overlooked their entire valley. It was autumn, and the cottonwoods along the creek glowed gold. From this height, they could see their house, their barns and corrals, their grazing cattle, the garden that was now mature and lush. Smoke rose from the chimney, and they could hear the faint sounds of their children playing. 10 years, Beckett said, dismounting and helping Olivia down. "Sometimes it feels like yesterday you stepped off that stagecoach, and sometimes it feels like you've always been here." "I have always been here," Olivia said. "At least the real me has. The person I was before in Boston, she was just a shadow. This is where I became real." "You were always real. You just needed the right place to bloom." He pulled a small box from his pocket. "I wanted to give you something to mark the occasion." Inside the box was a necklace, a delicate gold chain with a small pendant shaped like a wildflower. "It's beautiful," Olivia breathed. "The flower is supposed to be a mountain aster. They're tough, beautiful, and they thrive in harsh conditions." He fastened the necklace around her neck. "They reminded me of you. I love it. But you know what I love more?" She turned in his arms. "I love that after 10 years, 5 children, and more challenges than I can count, you still find ways to surprise me. You still make my heart race like it did that first time you kissed me." "Good. Because I plan to keep doing that for the next 50 years. They stood together on the ridge, looking down at the life they had built. It had not been easy. There had been hardships, losses, and struggles, but there had also been joy, love, and moments of perfect happiness. They had created something lasting, a legacy that had nothing to do with land or cattle, and everything to do with the family they had made together. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, they rode back down to the house. The children rushed out to greet them, all talking at once, pulling them in different directions, demanding attention. Daniel, now a serious boy of 9, wanted to show his father a bird's nest he had found. Margaret, at 7, insisted her mother see the new dress she had made for her doll. The 3 younger ones simply clung to their parents, happy to have them home. That night, after the children were finally in bed, Olivia and Beckett sat together on their porch, much as they had on countless other nights. The stars spread above them in a glittering canopy, and somewhere in the darkness, a night bird sang. "You ever think about what your Uncle Daniel would say if he could see all this?" Beckett asked. "I think he'd be proud. I think he'd be happy that his legacy wasn't just land but love. That what he built became the foundation for our family." Olivia leaned against her husband's shoulder. "I wish he could have met you, met the children. I think you would have liked each other." "I like to think I did know him in a way. Through his books, through the choices he made, through the way he built this place with respect for the land and the people around him. He taught me about being a better man, even though he was gone." They sat in comfortable silence, 2 people who had learned each other so well that words were not always necessary. The night air was cool, carrying the scent of pine and grass and the clean smell of water from the creek. From inside the house came a small cry, quickly soothed, one of the children having a brief nightmare and finding comfort in not being alone. "We should go in," Olivia said, but neither of them moved. "In a minute," Beckett replied. "I just want to sit here with you a little longer." So they stayed, holding hands in the darkness, counting their blessings in the form of children sleeping safely inside, cattle lowing softly in the distance, and the land that had brought them together spread out around them. The inheritance Olivia had traveled so far to claim had given her so much more than she could have imagined. She had come for land and found love. She had come seeking security and found purpose. She had come alone and found family. And as she sat there with Beckett, feeling the solid warmth of him beside her, she knew that this was the true inheritance her uncle had left her. Not the acres or the water rights or the cattle, but the opportunity to build a life of meaning, the chance to love and be loved, the space to become who she was always meant to be. "Thank you," she whispered, to her uncle who could no longer hear, to Beckett who heard and understood, to the land that had tested her and found her worthy, to the life that had challenged her and let her win. "Thank you for what?" Beckett asked. "For everything, for this life, for being exactly who you are, for loving me." "I'll love you forever," he said simply. "That's a promise I can keep." And he did. As the years continued to pass, their children grew and eventually began their own lives. Daniel, serious and studious, went east to study law, determined to fight for justice in ways his parents had taught him. Margaret married a young veterinarian and settled nearby, raising horses and her own children within visiting distance. The others found their own paths, some staying in Montana, others venturing elsewhere, but all carrying with them the values they had learned growing up on the ranch. Olivia and Beckett grew older together, their hair turning gray, their hands becoming weathered and worn, but their love never diminishing. They watched their grandchildren play in the same creek where they had first worked together. They passed down stories of how they met, how they fought for this land, how love had been their greatest strength. On a summer evening many years later, when both were well into their 70s, they sat once again on the porch they had shared for so many years. Beckett's health had been failing lately, his heart growing weaker, but he insisted on being outside, looking at the land he loved. "No regrets?" Olivia asked softly, holding his hand as she had held it thousands of times before. "Not a single one," Beckett replied, his voice thin but certain. "Every choice I made that led me to you was the right one. Every challenge we faced together made us stronger. This life with you was everything." "It was everything," Olivia agreed, tears streaming down her weathered cheeks. "You were everything." They sat together as the sun set one more time over their valley. Two people who had built a legacy of love that would outlast them both. And when Beckett's hand finally went slack in hers, when his breathing quietly stopped and his spirit left his worn-out body, Olivia held him and whispered her love one final time. She lived another 5 years after that, staying on the ranch with the help of her children and grandchildren. She never remarried, never even considered it. She had been blessed with one great love, and that was enough. She spent her days in the garden, teaching her grandchildren about plants and life and love, passing on the wisdom she had gained over her long years. When her own time came, on a clear autumn day with the cottonwoods turning gold just as they had that first day she arrived, she died peacefully in her sleep, surrounded by the family she and Beckett had created. And in her hand, she clutched the wildflower necklace he had given her so many years before. They buried her next to Beckett on a hill overlooking the valley with a simple stone that read, "Olivia Whitmore Kane. She came seeking an inheritance and found love." And the ranch continued on, passed down through the generations, a lasting testament to what two people could build when they chose love over fear, determination over despair, and each other over everything else. The land remained productive, the family remained strong, and the story of how Olivia came west and found not just property but purpose, not just land but love, was told and retold, a reminder that the greatest legacies are those built on love and courage. The wildflowers in the garden bloomed every spring, tough and beautiful, thriving in harsh conditions, just like the woman who had planted them and the love that had made it all possible.